Awesome. Okay. Okay. So I don't know if you guys ended up doing your homework to look up what these terms meant, the forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning. Did you guys go in and look? No, nobody did, right? That's okay. It's no problem. That's why now, because I was able to go in and add, but I do want you to think about how these different communication stages happen. There's stages of communication, but it's also the stages of forming the team, because when they are creating their space, they're finding their way to being a team, they go through these pieces. So these are just, here it's a little bit bigger because you can actually see it. But these are very basic stages. And if you look at how these things are explained, you realize when you go through these yourself as well. It's the way that you go through when you meet new people, especially like if you're a teacher and in the beginning of the year, you have all that influx of like new teachers coming in and getting to know new people and trying to figure out where you are in this stage. Even looking at this can be really useful and beneficial for you as an individual. And also in terms of trying to figure out how your team is working, how you're working with your team, because you also go through these moments. So when they're forming, they're trying to, know each other. They don't know each other yet. So teams that don't know each other, they end up in this stage. So they're very polite. And a lot of the time they end up not really able to produce a lot because they're not trusting to share ideas. They're not ready to put themselves out there, but also they don't want to criticize or give feedback to people that they don't know, which is a totally natural thing. Then you have the storming moment where they end up fighting a lot. And some teams, they spend the entire season seemingly in this storming part. Like I've already talked about this team that I had that was their team dynamic. They were always in storming. They were always fighting with each other. They were very dramatic. But if they don't go through that moment where they start to be able to criticize, give feedback, but they're maybe not prepared to receive that feedback, it makes it very hard to go into the moment that you can start to trust the other people in your team. So then you can start to work towards a common goal. That's when they get to norming, they actually start to realize that they're a team. It's no longer about your idea, my idea, and whose idea is the best and which idea we're going to use. It's very specifically about a common goal. When they're in this moment, then they can start to really initiate, collaborate. I mean, these things, they follow very easily into the creative process. When they get to performing, of course, this is where they're able to really produce. And a lot of the time, this is the moment that they are actually at the tournament and they are producing things. And that's when you start to see, did the team move through those stages? Because the teams that didn't move through those stages, if something happens on that stage, they don't know how to react to it. They don't have a natural way of like having the scenery break in the middle of the process and having nobody freak out about it. So you can see the teams that they moved through those stages because they react as if nothing out of the ordinary is happening. And it's so important for them to go through that and to work on these moments of improvisation, because something will always go wrong on that stage. Like every time, something always happens that is unexpected. Something doesn't work, something breaks, somebody forgot a prop, somebody forgot a line. And it's so important for the team to just be able to move through that naturally. So showing them these stages that they're in and telling them that this is a completely normal thing for them to happen as a team is something that helps them become self-aware. It helps them to accept when things are difficult. Because a lot of the time, the teams that you see, they're really gung-ho, they're excited, they form. And when they get to that storming stage, that is when the kids want to give up because they get so sick of fighting with each other. And that is your job to help them through that stage. Part of that is making them self-aware of going through it. It's early, but I did want to see if you guys wanted to, we can come back to this and do the Jamboard piece to talk about what it what it looks like and what it feels like in these moments. But I think it'll be a little bit useful to do it maybe at the end so we can revisit these pieces. But a very important piece for you guys to think about, because we started to talk about this. We started to talk about the use of materials. So another one of our 21st century skills that we want to make sure that we're always involving in our process when we're working on our team challenge and our instant challenge is working with our creative problem solving. And this is something that we really try to focus on in DI is this idea of stretching the use of materials, because we really want them to think about using things with purpose. So not just to use and waste materials and not just to go and buy a new material because that's the perfect material, but to really look at trying to create this idea of sustainability in their heads, that we don't need to have feathers because we can create them with something else. I don't remember, did we talk about what materials we saw here? We did a little bit, right? So in this part, we established which materials were here. We have plastic, we have.
Oh, we just brainstorming, and we were guessing. Oh, this is plastic. I think this is cartolina.
Okay, all right. So what I'll tell you for what we have on here, the entirety of what is on here. Let's see. What do you think the dragon is made of?
I think it's cartolina. PETs, garrafa plástica, that's it, I think.
What do you think the scenery in the background is made of?
Looks like
recycled paper, recycled cardboard. It looks like those bread papers, like that when you go to the
sandwich bags or something.
Like when you go to the padaria and get
yes, exactly.
Get some
and
bread.
then you ask for a bread, they put on a
or maybe coffee filter. I don't know. The color reminds me of.
Yeah.
I was going to say that.
What do you think the costume, or the purple costume? Let's focus on one costume at a time. Purple costume. What do you think is in there? What materials?
I can't see it properly, but I think, is it like crepon? I don't know. Or
EVA, something like that. I don't know.
I don't think EVA.
In the
we know those pompons. I don't know how to say it in English. That cheerleaders use.
Okay.
So I think, for example, this blue thing. I know we were talking about the purple costume, but
yeah,
on her head, I think it looks like a pompon or a cheerleader pompon or something like that. I don't know.
I think it's a ripped plastic bag, one of those blue ones, like those trash bags that you use.
Yeah, maybe.
She's wearing. Is that feathers? Is that? I can't understand what this is. The purple one.
They're not real feathers, I suppose.
No, but something that mimics feathers. I don't know what this is.
It should look like. I don't know.
I think I saw this before, and this is all recycled material. Is it, Ale?
Remember we had the boas. We used the boas. Maybe it's the feathers off them.
I don't remember, but I don't know. But I've seen this before. I remember everything is recycled here, right?
Yeah, everything that is actually on here is all trash items material, except for possibly this black piece of fabric skirt. I'm not sure if that was really a trash item. But for the most part, it is trash items that you see on this stage. We have cardboard boxes, cut apart. And if I remember right, this dragon, I don't think I saw this dragon, but I've seen one like it. And it was pieces of cardboard boxes that were like those really thick ones. And it was completely put together with those little pochettes. I don't know how to, brads, I think they call them in English. So there's like a little hole, they stick it through and then open little metal doohickeys on the side to keep it together. So this thing came in pieces and then they remounted it, putting it together with these little brads. I'm not sure what the spikes are. There's definitely there's plastic bottles here. There is paper bags here. Plastic bottles. Anybody want to take a gander where the plastic bottles are?
The eyes of the dragon? No.
Okay. Any other guesses?
The feathers? Is it possible? Yeah.
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 Whoa.
It looks like they shredded it.
Whoa.
It's like they took it and then like cut, down the sides. I think there's duct tape. I think you can see down here on the bottom, like there's probably some duct tape to provide, a little more coverage maybe from the plastic, or maybe it was a way to mount it. But this costume, the purple costume, is made entirely out of, I think, duct tape and plastic bottles. And I think at the top is those little pop tabs as well. It's hard to see in here. And the wigs. What do you think the wigs are? The pom-poms.
I thought it was a shredded plastic bag, like because I have one of these blue ones.
It's a little hard to know because this is, I believe these are, US available materials and we don't really have these so much, but the wigs are actually those mops that are made of like a weird, like fell through kind of material and you attach it to the thing and we don't really use those so much in Brazil because
they're so American.
Come on.
They get really gross. I'm not really a fan of mops, to be honest. I feel like they're just like, you're wiping your floor with like more dirty string. I don't think they're very useful for cleaning. I prefer a pano de chão that I can put in the wash.
In Portugal, we use it. We use the mop, the thing that you use in Brazil, the cloth and that stuff that, I don't know. A mop that you have here is very strange for me.
Yeah, I'm not really a fan of mops. I wasn't before I came to Brazil, and now that I live here and see there's a better solution that's cleaner, I don't think I can go back. So, but
here you have a system that's all technological, that it squeezes and it puts the chemical products on it. It's not that bad. The new ones are technological, okay.
Yeah, but then they're expensive.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the idea of this is that they used mostly trash and they used it in creative, innovative ways that we can see. And if I had to guess, probably these mops are maybe from the dollar store, so they were cheap. Like they probably weren't, like you go to the supermarket and there's gonna be like 120 reais for this mop because it's newfangled dangle, whatever. So the idea that we want to put into their heads when we're working with this, and the way that we want to always be focusing on materials when we're working on creative problem solving, is that they never have to think of like, they can think that way too, but like, what can we do with the materials that we have? That's where we want them to focus, because we're looking for creating better people. We're looking for creating this idea of sustainability in their heads, that most of the things, like I can do a lot of really cool stuff with trash, like stuff that people were going to throw out. And I'm like a super firm believer in this, like, and Leticia knows this because she works with me in the classroom. The classroom is full of trash and it's everywhere all the time. And I save everything. I save everything. I'm totally a pack rat with trash because you never know what it could be used for. And it's great when you have this stock of ideas that like, oh, I'm trying to figure out how to do something. And I know that I can go and get, some random material and try to figure it out. It goes back to the idea of that video that I mentioned in the first training with Dr. Ken Robinson, that changing the paradigm, that like if we give the kids a space where this creative problem solving is allowed to happen and encouraged, they won't lose that ability to think more creatively, that they can solve a problem with the trash. So here's some stuff in front of me. What can I do with it? So usually, if we were doing this in a live presential meeting, like you guys would have a whole bunch of material in front of you in order for you to be able to brainstorm with it. One of the things that I do with the kids that work in my school in the teams is that we do a creative problem solving focused on the creative process instant challenge workshop. So I take them through the steps of the creative process and how they need to think about materials, how they need to think about the problem, the definition, and all these things. And they need to just think about how things can be used. So have you guys used Jamboard at all? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes, I have used.
All right, so I'm going to copy this, and we have this Jamboard. I'm going to put it in the chat because since we don't have the benefit of being presentially together, we can't brainstorm with physical materials. But I do want to stress that this is super important to do with kids. So, and like, especially like the younger the kids, the more creative they are. But if they don't have that material in front of them to brainstorm about what are the properties of that material, sometimes they can't get there. So it's really important for them to have these materials and to always be messing with these materials. So if we want to, let's take a couple of minutes to just sort of add what are the properties of each material. So here are the principal materials that we see in that picture. We have aluminum foil. Sorry, the color is like a little weird now. It looked okay last night, but maybe that's because I was working in the dark. We have aluminum foil, plastics, paper, cardboard, and the sponge mop. So if you were trying to brainstorm like the way that materials can be used, we can use like sticky notes. You guys know how to use the sticky note thing on the side. So you just click on there, you get a sticky note, choose whatever color you want, and then stick it on there. Let's take like 1 minute. I'm going to put a timer, 1 minute to put as many properties, like as many ways that you can think of to use these materials on here on the Jamboard. And then since you guys have all opened the Jamboard, then it'll still be there for you to think about. And I would encourage you to do this with your kids as well, but you can do it, I mean, obviously, presentially. Everybody clear on how to do that? I see there's like 6 people in here.
Ali, I
You guys know how to get...
Do you think ways that I can use plastic, paper, cardboard, is that?
Yeah, think about the properties of each material. So if you like, what are the properties of aluminum foil? It can be torn, it can be bald, it can be, it's shiny, it's not conductive, it can be shaped into things. So think about these properties and just make like a sticky note and stick it underneath our categories here.
Okay.
And everybody has editing rights, right? Because I thought I left the thing open. But I'm going to give like 1 minute. So like maybe like in 1 minute, try to hit all of them with just a couple of properties that you can think of. So it'd be one of these moments, Leticia, where I should have some background music, right?
What?
So you always put background music to get the kids like excited and focused. I was just thinking that. And now we have participation of Black Cat. Excuse me. I like sounds crispy. That's fun. Got about 10 seconds left. Okay, I'm going to call time on that, but it's a very fast brainstorming exercise. And this is something you can do with your kids. Like you can do it with sticky notes. You can have them just writing on papers. There's a lot of different ways you can think about brainstorming about materials. And it's important to do this before they start messing with materials, because they start to realize all the different ways that materials can be used. What would you do if you were trying to create a similar scene to what we had in here? Would you want to have different materials? You think those materials are sufficient? Is there a material that you would have liked to use there in order to create a scene like that? Could you think of another one that could be included? Everyone's so quiet. When we started putting different ideas here, one of the things, I don't know if you probably noticed because I'm sharing my screen, but one of the things I started to do was to copy and paste some of these ideas, because when you look at like aluminum foil, it's shiny. Plastics, they're also shiny. Paper and cardboard, is it shiny?
Paper and cardboard, depends if you paint, yes.
Okay, so so we could put shiny there, and then like it can be folded. That was on paper. I stuck it on aluminum foil. Do you think we could copy and paste and put it on plastics? Can it be folded?
Aluminum foil. Can it be folded? Yeah.
No, plastics, because it's here. It's here in aluminum foil. But if I'm going to copy and paste, can I put it in plastics?
Plastics? Yes.
So one of the ways that we think about materials in DI is we think about them in these three categories. We call them connectors, extenders, and controllers.
Yeah.
So when we think about these materials and we're like, okay, so a connector is something that does what? What does a connector do?
Connects one material to the other.
Connects one material to another. Right. What about an extender? What could that be?
An extender.
Yeah.
Paper can be an extender depending on how you use it. Plastic can be aluminum foil, actually. If you put the aluminum foil and you connect your pieces of plastic, for example.
So extenders are something that's going to make something longer. What about a controller? What do you think a controller is?
Plastic, like a switch, something like that. Like depends, right?
Everything is everything is everything.
Everything
is everything. Yeah, it really does end up being like that. Everything is everything. We have aluminum foil can be a connector. It can be an extender. It can be a controller. It could be all three categories. Sometimes they say controllers and containers. So both of these terms are used interchangeably now.
I didn't get the definition for controller.
Controller. What does anybody want to chime in what they think a controller might be?
A control can be like, imagine a device that is keeping the car from going down a ramp, and you click on it and it starts working, for example. Or something that is holding a piece, when you touch on it, it starts making like the let's say the action it is supposed to be, right? If I remember properly.
Yeah, connectors, extenders, and controllers, and sometimes they call it container.
Containers, right? Because it can be
they're using both of these terms now in DI, because back in the day it was a connector, extender, controller, but now they're also saying controller or container. So I think when we say container, it makes it a little bit.
Yeah, because I remember that we had some things that we could use as switches, like that was controlling something, and sometimes it was like the glass that hold the water in the tower of water, right? It was the same.
Yeah, and it's kind of an idea, maybe like something like, you imagine it's something like a hand, like it can hold something. But if you're thinking about connectors, you could also make a connector be like a hand and have it hold something because it's connecting, it can connect to the object. So when we're thinking about materials, we're always trying to think about these three categories. And it's a really interesting exercise to do something like this with the kids, because when you want them to think about how to separate these things into these categories, it's really useful for them to make that realization that everything is everything. Everything can go into all three of those categories. You just have to think about all the possibilities of the properties of that material. And it's important for them to mess with stuff like that, because when they go into an instant challenge, if they have in their head that the only connector that they have that they've worked with is tape and mailing labels, for example, but they haven't thought about aluminum foil as a connector, and then there's no connectors that they know, but oh, now I realize there's aluminum foil, so that could also be a connector, and thinking about the possibilities of that material and how it can be used. It makes a really big difference in terms of how they view materials and how fast they can solve a problem of not having a specific material that they, would prefer to be using. So taking time to mess with materials when we're doing creative problem solving is like super, super, super key. It's super key. Where is the one that we're on? There it is. Okay, found it. So I'll talk more about how to do that with IC when we do our IC portion, but I do want you to keep that in mind, because when we are looking at these materials, it's always important to make sure that we are addressing all the possibilities. And the best way to do that is by limiting what you give them. So we want to create this idea of sustainability. We want to create this idea that they don't need to go buy something new. They don't need to have that specific thing. They need to make it work with what they have. It's a good talent for the team challenge, and it's an excellent talent for the instant challenge. So when we're thinking about how to use all of these materials, we're always inside of this circle of our creative process. And here's some pictures from our creative process chart. And we want to make sure that we make our kids aware of the difference between creative and critical thinking. When we're creatively thinking, we're expanding. We're trying to think of all the possibilities, all the ideas in our head, all the things that are possible. And there is no limit to this. So feasibly, they could go on forever with this. And that's part of your job as a team manager, to make sure they don't get stuck in any one stage of the creative process. But it's important for them to see the difference between the two, because we don't want them to do critical thinking when they haven't expanded all the possibilities of their creative thinking. So we're trying to imagine all the possibilities, think of many ideas. We're seeking quantity. We're seeking innovative new ideas. We're seeking to combine ideas one with the other. There's a lot of tools in the roadmap that you can address and use to help them work with creative thinking and brainstorming, because brainstorming goes way beyond just, oh, let's sit and think about ideas and write them down on a piece of paper. There's a lot of ways that they can brainstorm. So when the kids start to think about ideas, they write, like 10 ideas, and they're like, we can't think of anything else. then you can pull out one of these tools for creative thinking, like Scamper or Silent Brainstorm, or trying to think of a name of another one. There's a whole series of them there. Scamper is a nice one because it has, it's an acronym and it's easy to remember. But then they have like how you can maximize, minimize. So you take existing ideas, how can you make it bigger? How can you make it smaller? How can you use different materials? So it works with these individual things. You can do with the alphabet. So let's think of something that starts with the letter A that we could make with that material. So there's a lot of different ways to get them to realize that creative thinking is expandable. And we really want it to be about quantity. You want as many things as possible. When we want to start narrowing down and focusing on something, that's when we start pulling out our critical thinking. And there's a series of tools that are in the roadmap that you can use to do this very specifically. So once you start using these tools with the kids, they start to ask for these tools. So there's like critical choice analysis, there's combination charts, there's very specific things where they have to put specific things together and try them. And that's how they can get down to a point that they're going to choose an idea based on a number of criteria that the whole team is working towards. That's where we can start to get them out of storming about who's got the best idea or whose idea we should use, into the norming where they can actually start to focus on a common goal. So when you're doing critical thinking, here's a series of tools that are just like examples. So we have decision-making matrix. These are all straight out of the roadmap. Idea generation chart. This is really easy because they just, everybody write one. So you take a paper, you fold it up, write one idea in it, throw it in the middle of the table, pick up another paper, read the ideas that are there, write another idea based on those things, because that's a lot of the time, that's how you get your brain thinking. If you're trying to think in isolation, you're not going to think of all the possibilities. But if you start to work with other people's ideas, it makes you start realizing all the other possibilities. Here's the ABC brainstorming. So trying to think of something for each letter of the alphabet. There's mix and match. This is a really fun one to do even in the classroom if you start to work with a series of things. Actually, I really want to try and use this next week for teaching math. So they'll take like a problem and then they'll have to choose which of the strategies they're going to use and which of the ways they're going to display it. So doing that mix and match, because sometimes when you find you have like a series of ideas or a series of ways to do something, you can try different ways and like you'll find a strategy that works really well to express that idea or is really exceptionally creative that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise because you're so stuck on this one idea or one particular thing. So using these things can make the kids realize how they can do it. KWL, everybody knows that one if you're a teacher. That's a good one to use when they're trying to examine what skills they need to learn. So if they have a great idea to make a costume, they want to use fabric to do that costume, but nobody knows how to sew. Well, now we realize we want to make this costume, we want to use fabric, but we don't know how to sew. So we need to go figure out how to sew and find someone to teach us. Choice helpers. I mean, these are just like a series of things that are there that are offered. The paired choice analysis and making these like comparative statements about things. So it really helps them to organize. And it's important to pull these things out of your arsenal and teach them these skills, because it's not that we're looking to control these kids. We want to give them tools for life. And these are tools that we can use for anywhere. They don't have to be used for DI. You can use any of these brainstorming or critical thinking pieces. You go from one to another in any type of a situation. Another thing that we spend a lot of time teaching the teams about, and in the beginning, especially with new kids, you're going to need to spend time doing it yourself and getting your head around what that means, is documenting the value of the things that are there on that stage. So this is something that the kids need to be responsible for. And it goes back to that idea of the sustainability part, that we want the kids to be always thinking about purposeful use of materials and being innovative with their use of materials. So there's a series of forms that the kids need to fill out when they're doing their team challenge. There's an expense report. And the expense report is in the rules of the road. And I believe, and you will have to submit it online for your teams. And I think you have to use the dollar exchange rate on the 1st of September, which was when the season starts. So you just look that up. I mean, nobody's going to be nitpicky about it so much, but it's really important for them to keep that part in mind, especially for those of us that work in international schools where many of the students are very well off. It's very easy for them to go and buy, you know, like the perfect kind of material and whatever. We really want to keep them focused on sustainability. That's why they have a limit in their budget, because we want to make sure that it can be created by any team anywhere in the world for the same price. So save receipts, to do those conversions, but put the kids in charge of this. This is part of their development of math skills. This is part of their responsibility for making sure that they're following within the specifics of the challenge and within the specifics of trying to be sustainable. There's a whole bunch of stuff with project management. So creating this chart here, we have this is the project plan. So once they've gone through all that creative thinking part and all that critical thinking part, they know we're going to make a scenery using only black, white, and gray. We're going to only use the color red to indicate something. We know we need a costume and it's going to use the color red. We know that we need a script and we want to write it entirely in poetry. We know that we need to have a song and we want to make sure we have at least 3 instruments. So they make that list of the deliverables, the things that need to be produced, and then work with, in the skills of the team, of who is going to be the manager and make sure that that thing is getting done, who is going to be the person that's going to seek out to learn those skills, and any other things they can think of. So like, we need to buy red material, we need to buy red paint, or we need to scavenge material from the DI closets, or we need to go and get, you know, scraps of material from somebody's workshop. I mean, we don't know. But giving them this list and giving them this tool to create who's going to be responsible for what gives this this part that the kids are going to have to organize themselves. And then they just start to run automatically from these things. Because then every single team meeting, you're going to pull that thing back out and check, where is everybody? How are we working on that? There's our project plan. So talking about, again, here are things that need to be accomplished. We need to write a script. When are we going to be planning on accomplishing that? Is that something we're going to be able to do in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks? Putting a time frame on it. We need to create a costume. We need to learn how to sew. So when is that going to be done? So that they don't just get stuck in this moment, that they're thinking and critical thinking, but they never make a plan of action. They can't move forward. They need to start that production. So it's important for them to think about the time frame, because if they just think about it in a broad sense, that, you know, it's like, it's in April, they feel like they have all the time in the world. And they put things off. Like I had a team that they had to build, they had a scenery. They made the scenery, and this is always something, it's like a chronic problem with teams. They forget that scenery doesn't just stand there on its own. They forget that they need a support for the scenery. So there's a lot of different ways to build supports for scenery. And one of the things that's very commonly used in the US is PVC pipe frames, because they're very easy to put together, take apart, and it's very cheap in the US. In Brazil, that is not the case. So we had a team, I had a team that they decided they thought it would be an interesting twist to use bamboo to build their scenery support. But they didn't have a plan about how they would connect the bamboo, but they thought, like, bamboo is you know, it's free. So they were like, okay, we're going to send somebody's driver to the Bambuzao, which is this big bamboo tunnel that goes to the airport here in Salvador. We're going to send out somebody's driver to go get bamboo for us. And that was as far as they got, but they never put a time frame on it. And then what happened? We got to Sao Paulo for our tournament, and their scenery ended up, whoever's not on the scene was holding the scenery up in the back, because they never took this tool out and put their pieces on it. So it's important to take these things out and use them, so that, because it's not you that's responsible for making sure that the kids are getting stuff done. That's not your job as a team manager. Your job as a team manager is to make sure that they are on track, and they're the ones that decide what their track is. We really want to make sure that they are the owners of the solution. So part of that is the no interference policy. It is a rule. We want a level playing field. We want to see what the kids can do without being told what is the right answer, because we don't know what the right answer is as adults. The kids have to decide that that is their answer, that that is their solution. So part of that is the Declaration of Independence, and that is a document that they sign. They sign one for the team challenge. They sign another one for the instant challenge on the day that they do the instant challenge at the tournament, where they declare that they didn't know about the instant challenge and that they had no help. And it seems, like, okay, it's just a thing. But it's an official document, and putting this out there that it's about, the focus is on the ownership, and it's about, that I trust that you're being honest on this document. It really instills in them this idea that it is so important to be that focused, to be honest, to be the ones who are in charge of it. Also important, these are the documents that I'll talk about again when we do the team challenge and instant challenge, but they have the tournament data forms. This is something that they have to fill out at the end of their challenge. And this is something that they fill out themselves. So if you're working with an elementary team, yes, you can type what the team says, or you can write what the team says, because maybe they don't write well, or maybe they're in first grade and they don't really write yet. It's important to get that part, that expression part, out of them and make sure that they explain themselves well. But you can't ask them to give more information. But what I always tell teams when they're trying to fill this out, it is to your advantage to give as much information about your process as possible, because this is the forms that the appraisers will receive at the tournament. And it's the only thing they have to go on for them to focus on what you think is important about your challenge, about what you think is important on that stage. So if you put a description of your team choice element and all you see is tools, that doesn't tell me who thought of the tool. It doesn't tell me what materials you used. It doesn't tell me how you built them. It doesn't tell me why they matter to you. It's important to always have them focus on the WH questions about all of these things. And giving this information, this is our second way of expression. They're up there, they're expressing themselves verbally and dramatically on the stage. But they also need to know how to express themselves in a written form. And part of that process is having them go through this and respond to these questions, because it is an important skill. They need to be able to work on all these skill levels in all these different types of areas and all these different types of expression. And again, the whole time we're doing all of this, we're always going back to what is the creative process and why it matters. We talked about the creative process in the introduction quite a bit. And I don't know if anybody took the time to look up the white pages from DI that explains each of these things. If nobody did and you want it, just please let me know, and I will, I'll share the link to it at the end, because I have it in my Google Drive if we don't find it online. But all the time, this is always the process that we're in. And we always want to make sure that the kids are aware where they are in the process. And in the beginning, you do need to be kind of explicit about where they are, because eventually they get to a point that they realize that they're moving through, and they'll know where they are in the process, and they'll be able to see that they have gotten stuck in one place. But you do need to make sure that you're always reminding them that it is an ongoing process. It's fluid. It's okay to go back to imagine if you start to initiate and collaborate and you realize that you could think of more things, or you need to think of other possibilities. And it's really important to always keep them moving through. So this is the end of this one. I'm going to go back to the instant challenge part that is here, and I'm going to leave it there because we're going to come back to that instant challenge at the end. Dun, 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 dun. There. Okay, I'm going to leave that there, and we're going to go, let me stop sharing, and I'm going to go to the other one, which is about the team challenge and instant challenge. How many of you guys are completely new and have no idea what these terms mean? Team challenge and instant challenge. Okay, so there's two main portions of the DI process that you're going to work with your teams. And they are the team challenge and the instant challenge. So I'm going to go, I don't know why it's at the end. Why are you at the end? Who knows? Well, let me go back through. And then I'll share the screen again. So the two main process parts that we do with the DI program is the instant challenge and the team challenge. So now I'm going to explain those two different parts and kind of how they're structured and how they work. So here is our PowerPoint. And where are your faces? Because I like to see the people, even though nobody has their camera open, but I like to know that you're still there. All right, so instant challenge. The idea here is that we're focusing on rapid ideation and implementation, because instant challenge is something that all the teams have to go through at the tournament, because we're focusing on teamwork and idea development and creation over a long period with our team challenge, but over a short period with our instant challenge. So once again, here's all our focuses for our program. It's skills building. We just finished that, but we'll go back to a couple of spaces there. Then we have instant challenge, and then we have the team challenge portion. So we're going to focus on instant challenge. And instant challenge is something that a lot of the time is what really brings the kids into the program. It's what makes them get excited that this is the thing that, like, you do an instant challenge day or an instant challenge workshop in your school. This is where you're going to get kids that are like going to be like, okay, I want more of this. Like, I want to join this program. It's really fun. And it's so funny. It's fun. It's really hard. And most of the time, the first time that they do stuff in instant challenge, they completely, totally fail. Like, they are not able to produce anything. And that's totally normal. And it's okay. And it's actually really important that they have that experience of complete and utter failure, because it gets them over that bump of that they need to be successful in order to be in the program. Because the program is not about being successful. It's about growth. It's about their process. It's about them realizing that they have a lot of potential. So instant challenge is great for teaching that. It gives them an opportunity to try out different team roles, which I talked a little bit about the team roles in the skills portion last weekend. So when they're thinking about team roles and the things that they need to do on a team, doing IC gives them a chance to try out different team roles in a very fast way. So, because all ICs are going to be, about 5 minutes or less. They rarely go longer than that. And one thing that it's super important to remember, they always want to ask for more time because they want to be successful, but be firm. This is not about them being successful. It's about them learning where they can improve. So it's important to not give them more time. So instant challenge. It is about creating our culture of appreciation, trust, and support. When we're working with instant challenge, we're working with quick reading comprehension. And this is not something that works well for all teams. And especially when they're younger, and this will happen in all instant challenges, of course. Like, they have their copy that they will read and they will hear it read to them. But we want them to read and process very fast. So this is not something that happens immediately. This is something that they need to go through a series of different experiences and different types of experiences in order for things to sink in. And that's why it's so important for them to do instant challenge at every single team meeting, because instant challenge has a very specific setup for the way that it's written. Initially, when you see it, you're like, oh my gosh, that's like so many details, but it's very specific about getting them to focus their efforts and their parts of the creative process so that they can sort what things have to happen in what order. And I'll show you what that is. It is about role respect and let it flow. So if you've gone to an improv workshop, a really great improv technique that works well in instant challenge is this idea of yes and. Is anybody familiar with that? That improvs? No, nobody's heard of this. So
sorry.
Yes and. Yeah. Felipe, did you want to?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't listen. What did you ask?
Okay.
What was your question?
If any of you are familiar with the improv technique of yes and.
Sounds
Yes,
familiar. I think so.
Yes, and some people, okay, so some people know it. I can see it in the chat. So the yes and is this idea that you never have a stop in the movement of a story or a process. So whatever happens, we're going to say yes, and I'm going to add this additional thing. Yes, and I'm going to add this additional thing. It's a great storytelling technique. And it gets the kids into this mindset that we need to just keep moving. And it's not about like having one person saying, okay, no, but this has to happen. So, no, you can't do it, because you don't want the movement to stop. You don't want them to stop thinking about progress forward. And when you have somebody who's going to judge and shut down movement, you're not going to have a good IC experience. So you want to teach them some idea of like, okay, I have an idea. Yes, I'm not going to say, no, I don't like your idea. Yes, and we could also try this. Yes, and we could also try this, because this is where we start to grow our ideas. We're still working on our ideation where we can focus. So they need to listen and react at the same time, because they don't have time to sit and critical think and let's do a pair choice analysis. IC is not the place that this is going to happen. That's why it's important to pull out those tools when they have time to let it happen, because once they start using them, they know how to make it happen in a faster way. It's about material exploration. So that's where you want to do some of these like brainstorming things like we did with the materials from that scenery. Like we want them to explore the properties of the materials. We want them to think about what are the possibilities of the materials, because the materials that are in Instant Challenge are always going to be limited. So they're probably not going to have an unlimited supply of tape. They're probably going to have like one mailing label. So they need to understand that a mailing label is sticky, that it can be used like tape. They need to understand how to rip it in a nice way. They need to realize that they have a mailing label on a piece of paper on the mailing label frame, and they're not stuck with just using that mailing label. There's that whole outside part that's also sticky that can be used. So you want to make sure that they have time to explore the properties of materials in a lot of different ways, and always limiting them to not being able to get an additional material. So I like to do, like, I'll take an Instant Challenge and I'll do it several times with several different types of material, or even with the same type of material. And then like 3 weeks later, I'll do the exact same material and the exact same Instant Challenge, because I want to see what they thought about based on what they did last time and how they're going to improve. Because an Instant Challenge, once you use it, it doesn't have to go away and never be used again. It should be used again, because we want the kids to move through the process. There's 3 types of Instant Challenge. The Instant Challenges can be performance-based, where they have to do like a little play. Maybe they're going to write a song or act something out, and there is no materials used. There's task-based, where they probably have to build something with materials with a specific objective. And then there's a combined version. So you might have, you have 5 materials to build a prop and then use it in a musical. And a lot of the time, the planning and building time is very short. It's going to be like 2 minutes and then 3 minutes and then 1 minute to present. So most of the time, they're going to have some kind of half-baked ideas, some half-built props. Unless they've spent a lot of time doing these things, then they might, complete a little bit better in a faster sense. But this is why they need to have this let it flow phenomena, because they probably won't get through all the things that they're expecting to get through in that short period of time of building or planning. And they're going to have to just work through it and do something that they've never done before without having to fight with each other about what they're doing while they're doing it. It's a lot to ask of a kid. It's a lot to ask of us. And trying to do this part of improvisation and working within improvisation with different things. Like, I'm pretty good at improvising with materials. I'm not so good at improvising with performance. And it's so funny because it's one of my favorite challenges to watch. It's one of my favorite challenges to edit and to write, is the improv challenge. But I'm terrible. I'm terrible at improv. It's important for the kids to go through all of these different things. And there's a say, like at the tournament, if you are in the fine arts challenge, then you will get a challenge that is more task-based, because you get to show a lot about performance-based in a fine arts challenge, but maybe task-based, they don't know your skill set so much, so they're going to give you an instant challenge that is more task-based. And if you are doing something that's more task-based, like the engineering or the tech, then probably you're going to get a more performance-based instant challenge at the tournament. I don't know if this is true, because instant challenge is so secret that I don't know anything about what happens inside the instant challenge room. Even being the affiliate training director, and every year I train all the appraisers, I don't touch instant challenge because it is so secret squirrel that I don't even have the password. It is encoded and it goes just to the instant challenge challenge master, and they do their own training. I'm not allowed to even see anything that happens in there. So I really don't know what happens in instant challenge in the tournament, because I've never really been a part of it. I'm not privy to that information, but there's always these rumors. This is what the kids say.
And that makes me so curious all the time. The last one, I wanted to see what it was so much, and they couldn't tell me, and I was like, oh God.
Yeah, they can't say anything when they do instant challenge at the tournament. They can't say anything until after global finals, because it's the same instant challenge for every single team in that category, in that level. So elementary team in Texas will do that's in fine arts is going to do the same instant challenge that we're going to do in elementary level for fine arts here in Brazil. So it's really important that they don't say anything, because stuff gets out. You know, the world has ears, and we want to make sure that it's a level playing field and there's no interference. So if a team hears about somebody else's instant challenge experience, it could cause interference in their team. They may end up with an unfair advantage because they heard about somebody else's instant challenge experience. So as a team manager, sometimes like you can even make the choice to not even go in there. And I've had teams tell me that at global finals, they're like, no, please don't go in. Like it'll freak us out. I'm like, okay. So I stay out.
Didn't want me to go in.
Yeah.
Until today,
it's funny. And it kind of makes you feel bad, right? Because you're like, I kind of want to be in to support you, but at the same time.
I wanted to see it so much.
Yeah. And they can only tell you after the end of global finals. And then they're like trying to explain all the things, like on the way to like closing ceremonies, you're walking down to, I mean, at the time it was in Tennessee, you're walking down to the arena and they're like telling you everything, you know, they're like, because they really want to tell you, but they know that they can't. So like when they get that last moment that they can really tell you, then they're excited about it. And it's really cool. Like, and you can't really visualize what happened in there and without having been there. But I mean, it always sounds very fantastical. If the worst case scenario happens and we end up going into lockdown stuff, it's important for you to know that instant challenges can still be solved virtually. And there is a format for this that we used last year, and it was actually quite successful. So one way you can work with your teams trying to deal with instant challenge, when they're presential, you're going to go through the regular process that we'll talk about. But if you are in a distance learning scenario, you can still work with instant challenge. So you can do it in one of two formats. Either you can have the team members compete against each other, and then they need to gather the materials that are asked for in the instant challenge, and then they all try to solve it, and then they kind of compete with each other. Or, and this works really well. Actually, I saw it work really well with one of our teams last year that went to global finals, that you have like one team member has all the materials there, and then the other team members all gather in Zoom and talk about how to solve it and share ideas, and then they will build. So one of them will build, and then the next week have another one build, and then the next week have another one build. And it's a nice way for them to cycle through those different roles that we talked about. And it's also a nice way for them to share this moment, that because when you have one kid that has all the materials and everybody else just has to share their ideas, it really makes them work on their negotiation skills, because they have to wait for that person to understand what they meant about, well, you should do it this way. So it's really important for them to have these different experiences and to try it different ways, because you can even do this kind of a thing when you are presential and just have like, okay, today you're going to be the person that's building and everybody else practice just sharing ideas. It's important for them to practice these different things and to try the different roles. So when you're looking at instant challenge, the first moment that you bring an instant challenge to kids, inevitably they are going to fail. Like I like to always start all of my instant challenge workshops doing the paper tower challenge, which I think everybody has seen at this point because it's a very common one. And I think it shows up on the DI blog every year as something that they can do. And probably you've done this in your classroom with kids. So I like to start with paper tower where they have 20 sheets of paper and they have to build a tower as tall as possible using these 20 sheets of paper. And that's it. That's the only direction that you give them. And then inevitably, most of the time, if it's new teams or kids that have never worked in the program before, there's like a pile of crumpled up paper in the middle of this group of kids on the floor at the end. But if you have a team that's done it once before, they know this little trick about folding the paper, and then they start to fold the paper. And then another team inevitably will see, oh, they're folding paper. Okay, let's try to flatten out our paper and fold our paper and see if we can get it to work. So it's important that they go through these experiences, seeing what other teams do so that they can start to think about things in a different way. So when you are doing it and you're doing it just with your team in one space, 4 different stages that we go through. And it is specifically learner-based and driven. So you have your prep parts that you need to do, but the actual creation, the actual ideation, the actual process that they go through is entirely up to the kids. And that's why, and it's important for them to fail. Let them fail. So in the prep, you will gather the materials, have them there ahead of time, and then you will read through that challenge first, check to see if there's some problems with vocabulary, especially with our ESL kids. They may encounter words that they don't know. So it's important to take time to chew on that vocabulary. Also yourself as the team manager to identify ahead of time if there's going to be words in there that maybe these kids are not going to understand. So you're prepared for being able to explain what that thing means or to translate it if that's the case that you think is going to work better. And you want to think about like what skills they might need, because as part of your job at the end, you can also give them some training and some feedback about skills at the end, not in the beginning. And you also want to take time to have them look at the goals that they had. And this comes in from previous instant challenges that they've done. So if it's their first team meeting, they've never done an instant challenge, they're obviously not going to look at goals. But once they do an instant challenge, they need to think about what it is that they want to do better next time. So they're going to set these goals. So when you go and you take this instant challenge, you're going to think about these goals that they had in mind. Second stage, you're student-led, okay? You're already going to have this prep moment. You read the challenge to them. The students have their copy. They're going to read along with you. And then they can ask questions to clarify. They can't ask questions to see, oh, can we do it this way? Can we build it this way? Can we use this? I mean, they will ask this. And when those questions come, you don't want to give interference and say yes or no. I always throw the question back at them like, does it say you can do this? Does it say this? Do you have this material? Or just going from the text like this. Oh, can we use tape? You must build a tower made entirely of paper. Do you think you can use tape? And they're like, no. Okay, so they already know the answer to the question, but they want this feedback. They want the right answer. Don't give it to them. This is a great practice for this. It's a great practice for them to learn about how you can learn about how to deflect interference and how for them to realize that they're the ones that have the information, that they need to make that decision.
I always made the question, remember the first rule of DI, if it doesn't say you can't, if it doesn't say you can't use or you can't do that, can you do it? Or can you use this? I always go back to that kind of strategy with the kids, and it worked really well. I never gave them the answers. I just threw them back at them as like this as well. And it worked.
Yeah, throwing the question back at them or just reminding them of this fundamental part of if it doesn't say you can't, then you can. But always go back to the text, because what we want them to realize is that they have all the answers. Yeah. They can decide for themselves. They don't need an adult to tell them how to do stuff. They need to explore their abilities. They need to have a chance to be a mess, to realize that they are the ones that control their actions. So it's crazy for them initially because they're probably not used to that kind of structure, especially if it's like a teacher-student relationship. It's going to be really hard for them to see that they're not just like out of control. But it's important. So the students, so it's why it says students clarify. They're going to ask you questions, but you're going to go back to the text and see, what does that mean? Now, if it's a question about like, what does that vocabulary word mean? That's why we looked at that thing ahead of time and thought about what is it in their L1, or thought about, you know, like what words are they going to struggle with here? Or what materials are they going to struggle with here? So you already have like an arsenal in your mind about where you're going to go, because you don't want to give them the answers. You want to be prepared to have them examine for themselves. Third stage, they're going to go through and they are going to practice their IC. So you're going to say, okay, you have 5 minutes to build a tower as tall as possible using only paper. Your time begins now. You know, team, are you ready? Yes, okay, your time begins now. Start the time. And they go. And all you're doing is observing. And sometimes it's hard to just observe, like, because they'll look at you, they want to see, they want to get feedback. They're like, can we do this? And it's like, you're just silent. You're just watching. And if you want to, and you should, maybe film them doing this, because it's important for them to be able to see their own behavior. It's hard for them to observe themselves objectively when they're in a process. But if they watch themselves afterward, maybe they see that like one member was over here doing something and we completely ignored this member and ended up not taking advantage of this amazing idea that they had because we completely ignored this person that was working on something. We saw like this person's trying to share an idea and nobody's listening to them. They only realize this when they see themselves. And this is something that is important for you to provide a structure so that they can make these realizations on their own. Now, time, okay? Maybe they built, maybe they didn't. Maybe there's a pile of crumpled paper. Maybe they're like screaming because the thing's falling over. I don't know what will happen. But now you're going to take time to break down their process and do a reflection. So you're going to do this post-explore space. So the students need to reflect. And there's a series of questions that you always want to ask. And they're there in the roadmap that you want to ask after you do an instant challenge, about thinking about what their process was, what they would do differently, how they could have used materials in a different way, how they used materials in an effective way, what are their goals for the next time they want to, when they go into an instant challenge again. So we're going to go back to what are our goals next time. Oh, we realized that this member was over here like trying to share ideas and we were not listening to them. So one of our goals next time is to make sure that we're always paying attention to everybody sharing their ideas. They don't have to choose a lot of goals, but they need to choose a goal on something that they're working towards in terms of progress of improvement. Now, like, oh, next time we're going to use materials more effectively. But how? How? Think about those little details. It's so important to put this language in their mouth, because otherwise they end up being vague and they create something that's unreachable. We have to make them purposeful about what they want to improve on. Be purposeful about what they want to do with materials and how they're going to use them. How are we going to be sustainable with our time management? How are we going to be sustainable with the materials management? All of these things are important. Then you as a team manager, if you've seen that there's a skill that they severely lack or something, just like a little factoid about how you can use a specific material, you can teach them at that moment, at the end of the instant challenge, after they've reflected, oh, did you know that paper can be folded? Here are some different ways to fold paper. And then you can show them some different techniques on how to fold paper to make it maybe stronger. Okay, don't go crazy, okay? But you want to make sure that you can take time to teach them techniques, because you're teaching them a skill. So here's a skill thing, like, okay, we really see that folding paper could have been effective. We need to learn how to fold paper. Okay, so let me show you some different ways that you can fold paper. That's why I always have these pieces of paper everywhere, because these are from that instant challenge that I do with the kids and also that I usually do with the adults. And then you see like different ways of folding paper. You can fold in a triangle, and this is how you can fold in a triangle. This is how you can fold it, and which things are stronger. You can even take time to, let's experiment with folding paper today. So choose one way to fold paper, and then we're going to test and see how many books can we stack on the top of this folded paper. These things are important for them to experiment with and start to realize the different ways that they can use materials.
One of the things I had the more difficulties last year was the last time we participated was understanding if that was interference or not. How much could we teach them in those moments? And that is a little bit difficult because for us, I think that the thing that's the biggest difficulty is separating the limit between interference and necessary teaching. And that was a little bit tricky, but luckily I had a high school group, so they worked alone perfectly. I didn't have to do much in terms of that, just looking, you made the structure. For example, I remember you were talking about the scenery with bamboo. When my kids started mounting their scenery, for example, I had to go back and say, okay, have you mounted your scenery? Okay, they mounted. Now because this will hold, okay, let's see it, mount the scenery. And it started falling down because they had decided the base is all wrong and everything. So it's complicated seeing the clear limit between interfering or teaching, interfering or not. I think that part, especially for the ones that are new, is going to be very complicated because even, okay, we have a little bit of experience because we participated before, but even for us, it's complicated, like seeing that clear limit. But well, I think instant challenge at that part after they've done the challenge itself, it's really important to see how they deal with it. I normally throw at them, okay, do it. How could you done that differently? And they start experimenting. But just sharing this.
Yeah, and in this part where the team manager like shares things, like it's better not to tell them things. It's better to ask them questions. So like, what are some different ways you could have used the paper more effectively? And a lot of the time they're going to get there. But at the end, if you have a team that's like, they really just didn't understand that paper doesn't just have to be crumpled to be tall, you can say, did you know you can fold paper? Let's try to brainstorm some different ways to fold paper. So just putting that idea out there and then getting them to make a realization. Another great way to do it, because I admit, like I feel the same way. And I know once they're post IC, and then you can, choose a technique based on their goals. Like we want to use material, we want to use paper more effectively. We want to learn how to use paper better. Okay, this was a goal you guys had. Here's what you guys did. Here's something you can do. Let's think about different ways we can fold paper. What's one of the ways that we can fold paper? And doing these different kinds of experiments, because this is based on their goals. And when you share, you're sharing like what you saw. Like I saw a lot of paper being crumpled up on the floor. Did you guys see that? Like, let's watch the video and see, what do you guys think of that? Like, how can we make it better next time? How can we use the materials more effectively next time? So, and it's important for the team to take charge of making the documentation, of explaining what their goals are and setting these parts that go into our number one stage for the next time.
And having their roles really, really clear inside the team, because who's going to lead, who's going to see the time, that's complicated, especially when you have a big group. It's really complicated to organize them in that target, to let them organize. That's the thing, not organize them, right? Because they really need to have it all clear, like who's going to see the time, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. Well. Yeah,
it's important to define those roles. It's really useful. I have a team manager at my school. She actually, she had, in the beginning with a new team, like she'll have like a bucket and then they draw their role. Okay, we're going to do an IC, everybody draw your role. And it's good for them to go through and have these different experiences in these different roles, because sometimes one kid in particular is just really good about the time. And then they remember, like, I need to ask for the time. And then they just get into that role and it becomes something that they do all the time. But it's important for them to have the different experiences in the different roles, because then what if that kid is sick on the day of IC and they're not there? And then nobody thinks to ask for the time because nobody else ever had that experience. So having them draw roles out before they do it and just switching roles around for IC is a great way for them to explore that. I think I touched on that in the last one because that's from the skills building piece. So going through these, the questions are there. It's really important to do these questions. And it's really important to remember that they, don't give them more time. They're going to ask for more time. Don't give them more time. But then just think of, okay, next time, where are we going to go? What are we aiming for next time? And then you bring that IC out again. A great way to avoid that feeling that you're giving interference when you're teaching them is to do these school-wide workshops, which is what I like to do, so that I'm not so worried that I'm like teaching to the kids, like I'm interfering in their instant challenge process. But the thing is, some of these things, they're not going to learn by osmosis of like, okay, they're not going to figure out a better way to use straws if they have no exposure to a great way to use straws. So one of the great ways to do that is doing these school-wide workshops where hopefully you're lucky enough that one kid knows that technique about folding the straw to stick it inside the other straw. And then the other kids see that and say, oh, I can do that. I didn't know I could do that. And they just picked that up. And then, one kid's going to be like, oh, they're copying us. It's not fair. It's like, no, they're not copying you. They are learning from you. And that's how it works about learning skills in the real world. Like, you don't know how to do something, you're going to look around and see how other people are doing it and try to do that.
Yeah. We have to just, I think we have to do that in our school, at least one day, to try to, I sometimes bring this to my classroom. So some kid, even if they're not participating, they already know how to use straws, mailing labels, things like that. Something I did in some of my sessions was I would put all the materials there, separated into different groups, and say, what can we do with this? And gave them time to invent things using that specific material, but not setting a goal or not giving a challenge, just putting in different parts. What can we do with this? Be creative. And they will stay there like 5 minutes using straws, the different things they could do with straw. Mailing labels just alone. What can you do with this? And it kind of helped me and helped them a lot to see the different let's say the different properties of the materials and how could they connect, how could they use them together. And after, I would throw an instant challenge. It was a different way to do it because we didn't have like the entire school participating. It was the first experience. But it was really nice to see that they actually know a lot more about the materials than we initially think or we believe. So it's, wow. I love DI, to be honest. I love the instant challenge. The instant challenge is the thing I love the most. So I like to use it in the classroom a lot as well.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's like it doesn't necessarily have like an academic focus that we can grade and stuff, but the social emotional growth of exploration, free exploration of materials and messing up and trying to negotiate with teammates and brainstorming together has so much value in an academic context. It helps them in all these other spaces. Like it's something you can use it all the time. And I like to have like elements of IC in almost everything that I do in the classroom. It really makes a big difference for them.
It's true.
So IC, clear, right? When you're approaching this, like I really encourage you to try and do like some IC workshop days. You can do like Felipe said, and just give them materials. And especially when you give them just one or two materials and just let them mess with those materials, there's a lot of value in exploring the materials there and seeing what the properties of the materials can be when you do it that way. You can also do these workshops that I run. That was how I approached it, because I had like 10 elementary teams and they were all completely, utterly failing at doing IC. Like all the time, like they had no idea. And I just started approaching it in a different way and breaking down the levels and the different parts of the creative process. So like first, we're going to imagine, what can we do with materials? We're not going to do anything else. We're just going to imagine what we can do with these materials and mess with them. Now we're going to get a definition and recognize what we need to do. Now we're going to imagine on top of the materials with this definition. Then we're going to start to collaborate, and we're only going to plan and we're not going to build. So I broke down that whole piece And once you give them those little pieces, they start to become more successful with this rapid ideation, because they start to separate the different levels, because they really wanted like creative and critical think at the same time. And they don't necessarily have the skill to do that if they're still in a storming stage, that they're just going to shoot down everybody else's ideas because they want to use their own. So there's a lot of little pieces at play here. So it's helpful for them to become aware of where they're